The first snow of December drifted lazily across Manhattan, softening the city's relentless edges without ever slowing its pace. 43 floors above Fifth Avenue, the glass walls of Volkov Tower reflected a sky the color of polished steel. Inside the executive penthouse, power lived in silence: Italian marble, dark walnut, original paintings worth more than most apartments in Brooklyn. Every room whispered success. Evelyn Carter had once thought it whispered home. She stepped out of the elevator, clutching a white envelope against her chest. Inside were 3 ultrasound photographs, carefully protected from the winter wind that had followed her through Midtown. Twin A. Twin B. 2 tiny heartbeats. Her fingers trembled every time she looked at them. 4 years of marriage. 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. Endless doctor's appointments. Hormone injections. Quiet tears shed behind locked bathroom doors. Today, for the first time, hope felt stronger than fear. She smiled to herself. Damien was going to cry. Not because he cried often. Quite the opposite. Damien Volkov rarely allowed emotion to cross his face. The billionaire CEO had built Volkov Holdings into one of New York's fastest-growing investment firms before turning 40. Business magazines called him ruthless. Financial analysts admired his discipline. Employees respected him from a distance. Only Evelyn knew the man who sometimes woke from nightmares after 18-hour workdays. The husband who secretly kept every birthday card she had ever written. The man who kissed her forehead every morning, even when conference calls were already waiting. She imagined his expression when he saw the ultrasound. The thought made her laugh softly. "I can't wait," she whispered. His assistant wasn't at the reception desk. Probably downstairs preparing for the executive council meeting. Perfect. She wanted this surprise to belong only to them. The penthouse doors were slightly open. That was unusual. Damien never left doors open. She pushed gently. The living room stood empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, where snow had begun collecting on bare branches. "Damien?" No answer. She heard voices farther inside. One male. One female. She smiled. Probably Victoria. Her oldest friend had recently become director of communications after Damien personally recruited her from a competing firm. Life had felt almost perfect. A successful marriage. A best friend nearby. 2 babies growing safely inside her. The voices became quieter. Then silence. Evelyn walked toward Damien's private office. The door wasn't fully closed. She reached for the handle. Then stopped. Not because of what she heard. Because of what she saw. Damien. Victoria. Standing impossibly close. Victoria's hands rested against his suit jacket. Damien leaned forward. Their lips met. Not accidentally. Not briefly. Long enough to shatter an entire future. The ultrasound envelope slipped from Evelyn's fingers. It landed silently on the thick Persian rug. Neither of them heard it. Or perhaps neither cared. Every sound disappeared. The city. The traffic. The heating system. Her own breathing. Nothing existed except the unbearable certainty burning inside her chest. Victoria slowly pulled away. "We have to make sure she never suspects anything," Victoria murmured. Evelyn couldn't hear Damien's answer. She didn't stay long enough to try. Some betrayals required no explanation. She bent down with shaking hands, picked up the envelope, and backed away before either of them looked toward the doorway. Every step felt unreal. The elevator doors closed. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Outside, Manhattan continued exactly as before. Yellow taxis honked. Tourists photographed Rockefeller Center. Street vendors sold roasted chestnuts beneath Christmas lights. No one noticed the woman walking through the crowd, as if the world had suddenly lost gravity. Snowflakes landed on Evelyn's dark coat before melting into invisible drops. She reached the corner without remembering how. Her phone vibrated. Damien. Calling. She stared at his name. For nearly a minute, then declined the call. Another came immediately. She turned the phone off. Not out of anger. Because she couldn't bear hearing his voice. A memory surfaced. 6 months earlier. "I'll never give you a reason to doubt me," Damien had whispered while dancing with her during their anniversary dinner. She had believed him. Completely. Now, every late meeting. Every cancelled vacation. Every business trip. every exhausted smile. Had they all been lies? A black SUV slowed beside the curb. Her driver stepped out. Mrs. Volkov? Everything all right? She forced a smile. I'm fine. You don't look well. I'm just tired. She wasn't ready to tell anyone that her entire life had collapsed in less than 30 seconds. Instead, she climbed into the back seat. As the city blurred outside the window, she placed one hand over her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered to the babies. I thought your father loved us. Tears finally came. Not dramatic sobs. Just silent tears that refused to stop. That evening, Damien arrived home to an empty apartment. Evelyn? No answer. Her favorite tea sat untouched. The dinner reservation she'd made weeks earlier remained on the kitchen calendar. Then he noticed something strange. Her winter coat was gone. One suitcase missing. So was her passport. His heartbeat quickened. He called. Straight to voicemail. Again. 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 Nothing. He opened their bedroom closet. Half her clothes remained. Half were gone. On her nightstand sat only one thing. Her wedding ring. Damien picked it up slowly. Confusion replaced irritation. Then fear. Real fear. For the first time in years, the man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions couldn't understand what had happened inside his own home. Behind him, unnoticed on the bedroom floor beneath the bed, one ultrasound photograph had slipped from the torn envelope during Evelyn's hurried packing. Neither of them knew it was there. Not yet. Outside, the first real snowstorm of winter covered New York in white. Inside the apartment, two hearts had already frozen long before the city did. The ferry horn echoed across Casco Bay just before sunrise. It wasn't the sharp, impatient sound of Manhattan traffic or the constant hum of helicopters circling skyscrapers. Here, in the small coastal town of Camden, Maine, every sound seemed to arrive with purpose. Gulls floated above the harbor. Fishing boats rocked gently against weathered docks. Salt lingered in the cold air long after the waves settled. Evelyn Carter stood outside the tiny cottage she had rented from an elderly widow named Margaret Ellis. The house wasn't much, a faded white Cape Cod with blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a wood-burning stove that protested every morning before finally warming the rooms. It was nothing like the glass penthouse overlooking Central Park. That was exactly why she had chosen it. She wrapped both hands around a mug of chamomile tea before resting one palm over the slight curve beneath her oversized sweater. 12 weeks. The twins were growing. For the first time in months, every doctor's appointment had ended with reassuring words. They're both strong, Dr. Rebecca Lawson had told her. Strong. Evelyn repeated the word every morning like a prayer. Strong enough to survive. Strong enough to forgive the life they had entered before taking their first breath. Margaret stepped onto the porch, carrying a basket of freshly baked blueberry muffins. You were awake before the sun again. Evelyn smiled politely. I couldn't sleep. Margaret had stopped asking why weeks ago. The older woman had recognized grief when she saw it. She had buried her husband 20 years earlier. Pain wore different faces. Sometimes it cried. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it simply kept making tea every morning. You'll wear yourself out worrying. I'm trying not to. Margaret looked toward Evelyn's stomach. Babies can feel when their mother carries too much sadness. Evelyn's eyes lowered. I know. But knowing wasn't the same as stopping. Nearly 400 miles south, New York never paused. Damien Volkov hadn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours since Evelyn disappeared. His office looked worse than most detectives' war rooms. Maps. Flight records. Hotel reservations. Private investigator reports. Phone logs. Security footage. Her credit cards hadn't been used. Her passport hadn't crossed any border. Bank accounts remained untouched except for a modest savings account she'd opened years before their marriage. She had planned carefully. Far more carefully than he realized. His executive assistant, Michael Grant, entered quietly. You have the council meeting in 20 minutes. Cancel it. They've already postponed twice. I don't care. Michael hesitated. The board is beginning to ask questions. Damien stared at another photograph. Evelyn laughing on a beach in Cape Cod the previous summer. Wind blowing through her hair. Looking at him. Always looking at him as though he were simply her husband, not one of the most powerful CEOs in Manhattan. I've already lost something worth more than this company. Michael remained silent. He had worked beside Damien for 11 years. He had never seen him like this. Not after billion-dollar lawsuits. Not after hostile takeover attempts. Not even after Damien buried his father. This was different. This wasn't business. This was helplessness. Across the hall, Victoria Hayes adjusted her reflection inside the mirrored elevator. The black dress was perfectly tailored. Elegant. Professional. Approachable. Exactly the image she wanted. She walked into the executive council meeting, carrying a leather portfolio. Council member Richard Ellison smiled. Any news? Victoria closed the conference room door. He still isn't thinking clearly. Good. He spends more time searching for his wife than reviewing acquisitions. Richard nodded. Exactly as planned. Victoria forced herself to smile. Inside, something tightened. She hadn't expected Evelyn to disappear completely. The kiss had been carefully staged. A calculated moment designed for discovery. Enough to create doubt. Enough to distract Damien during the council's vote to remove him as CEO. She had expected arguments. Divorce papers. Public scandal. Not silence. Not complete disappearance. Sometimes, late at night, she remembered Evelyn's face from college. They had shared dorm rooms. Birthday parties. Secrets. Dreams. For years, Evelyn had trusted her without question. The memory lasted only seconds before ambition buried it. Power demanded sacrifices. She simply hadn't imagined the sacrifice would be her only true friendship. The bookstore sat 3 blocks from Camden Harbor. Harbor Pages wasn't famous. It didn't need to be. Tourists wandered through during summer. Locals gathered for coffee every morning. Children sprawled across colorful rugs during weekend reading hours. The owner, Daniel Pierce, hired Evelyn without asking too many questions. You've organized luxury design projects? She nodded. I've done a little of everything. He smiled. Books don't care about resumes. That was enough. Now she spent afternoons arranging novels, recommending mysteries to retirees, and reading picture books aloud to children every Thursday. Nobody knew her as Mrs. Volkov. Nobody recognized magazine covers featuring glamorous charity galas. She became simply Evelyn. A quiet woman who loved books. Sometimes anonymity felt more valuable than wealth. At night, however, the silence always returned. She kept Damien's number blocked. Not because she hated him. Because hearing him would weaken her resolve. Some nights she unlocked her phone anyway. There were hundreds of missed calls. Voice messages. Texts. Emails. None opened. Each notification felt like someone knocking on a house already destroyed. She finally opened one. Just one. Evelyn, I don't know what you saw. But whatever it was, please let me explain. Just tell me you're safe. Damien. She stared until the words blurred. An explanation. What explanation could erase a kiss? What explanation could rebuild trust shattered in seconds? Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She typed. I'm carrying your babies. She froze. Read the sentence. Then deleted every letter. If he had chosen another woman, his children deserved better than growing up between resentment and betrayal. She turned the phone off again. Outside, waves crashed gently against the rocks. Inside, 2 tiny heartbeats continued their steady rhythm. Back in Manhattan, Damien entered the penthouse after another 14-hour search. The apartment felt colder every evening. He hadn't changed anything. Her slippers still rested beside the sofa. Her favorite candle remained on the bookshelf. Fresh lilies stood in the kitchen because he replaced them every Monday. As if she might return. Michael arrived, carrying another stack of reports. Nothing? Damien asked. Michael shook his head. No confirmed sightings. Damien rubbed both hands across his face. There has to be something. There is one thing. Michael handed him a sealed evidence envelope. The cleaning staff found this under your bed. Damien frowned before opening it. A small glossy photograph slipped into his hand. Black. White. Grainy. He stared without understanding. Then, his breathing stopped. At the top were words every expectant parent recognized instantly. Twin A. Twin B. Below them, 2 impossibly small figures. His children. His knees nearly gave way. No. His voice cracked. No. His hands shook violently. Evelyn hadn't simply left. She had left carrying his babies. Every sleepless night. Every unanswered phone call. Every mile separating them. She had endured all of it while pregnant. Alone. The realization struck harder than any business failure ever could. Michael quietly stepped backward toward the door. "Sir." Damien never answered. He remained standing in the center of the bedroom, staring at the ultrasound. Minutes passed. Then 1 hour. Finally, barely above a whisper, he spoke into the empty room. "You thought I'd abandoned all three of you." The sentence broke something inside him. For the first time since becoming CEO, Damien Volkov cried without trying to hide it. Not because he had lost his company. Not because the board threatened his position. But because somewhere in America, the woman he loved believed she had to bring their children into the world without him. And he still had no idea where she was. Far away in Maine, Evelyn stood on the beach beneath a sky crowded with stars. The twins kicked for the first time. She smiled through fresh tears. "Your daddy would have loved this." The babies answered with another tiny movement. She closed her eyes. "I'll love you enough for all of us." Hundreds of miles away, Damien whispered almost the same promise into an empty apartment. Neither of them knew that the people responsible for tearing them apart were already preparing the next move. The conspiracy had only just begun. January settled over Manhattan with a kind of cold that turned every breath into visible proof of survival. From the 43rd floor of Volkov Tower, the city looked untouched: glass towers glittering beneath winter sunlight, yellow taxis crawling through avenues, stock tickers flashing across giant screens in Times Square as if billions of dollars mattered more than broken hearts. To the world, Damien Volkov had returned to work. Financial journalists praised his composure. Investors admired his discipline. Employees watched him stride through the lobby every morning in tailored charcoal suits, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other, appearing every bit the relentless CEO they had always known. Only those closest to him noticed the difference. He no longer laughed during meetings. He no longer stayed late because he wanted to. He stayed because going home meant walking into an apartment that echoed with Evelyn's absence. The ultrasound photographs never left his briefcase. Every morning before entering the boardroom, he looked at them. Every night before trying to sleep, he looked again. Twin A, Twin B. His children. Somewhere in America. Growing without him. The executive council meeting began at precisely 9 o'clock. 7 council members occupied the polished walnut table. Victoria Hayes sat beside Richard Ellison, her expression calm, almost comforting. The agenda appeared ordinary. Quarterly earnings. European acquisitions. A proposed merger with a Chicago logistics firm. But Damien barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he watched faces. Studied pauses. Measured glances exchanged across the table. Something had begun bothering him weeks earlier. Small inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to leave a lingering sense that pieces of a puzzle no longer fit. Richard spoke first. "The board believes it's time to accelerate the expansion into renewable infrastructure." Damien nodded without looking up. "And the financing?" "Already secured." "By whom?" Richard hesitated almost imperceptibly. "Our usual banking partners." Damien slid a folder across the table. "Interesting." Richard opened it. His confident smile faded. Inside were copies of offshore wire transfers. Millions of dollars routed through shell companies in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. The room grew very quiet. "I don't recognize these." "No?" Damien folded his hands. "Because our internal auditors do." Victoria remained perfectly still. Too still. "Our auditors discovered 18 unauthorized consulting payments over the last 16 months. Richard forced a laugh. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There usually is," Damien replied calmly. "Until someone starts following the money." After the meeting ended, Damien walked directly into the office of Olivia Bennett, the company's chief financial officer. Olivia had worked for Volkov Holdings longer than anyone except Damien himself. She valued numbers more than politics. That was precisely why he trusted her. She closed the door behind him. "You finally noticed." Damien looked at her sharply. "You knew?" "I suspected." "For how long?" Almost a year. His expression hardened. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. She opened a drawer and removed 3 sealed envelopes. I sent reports. Damien recognized none of them. They never reached me. No. Olivia looked toward the hallway. They were intercepted. Silence settled between them. Someone inside the executive offices had been controlling information before it reached the CEO. That required access. Authority. Trust. His mind immediately rejected the possibility forming inside it. Victoria handled executive communications. She screened correspondence, scheduled meetings, managed media. She had access to nearly everything. No, it couldn't be that simple. Could it? Hundreds of miles away, snow covered the rocky coastline of Maine. Harbor pages smelled of coffee, old paper, and cedar shelves. Children gathered around Evelyn as she read Charlotte's Web aloud. When someone loves you, she read softly, the way they say your name is different. A little girl raised her hand. Miss Evelyn? She smiled. Yes? Are you having twins? The room filled with quiet giggles. Evelyn looked down at her growing belly. I am. Do they hear stories? I think they do. Then can you read louder? The children laughed. So did Evelyn. It surprised her. The sound felt unfamiliar, like rediscovering a language she had forgotten. For one brief moment, she wasn't thinking about Damien. She wasn't remembering the kiss. She wasn't wondering why he had never come. She was simply a woman reading to children while 2 babies turned gently inside her. Margaret watched from the cafe corner. Later, while closing the bookstore, she smiled knowingly. You laughed today. Evelyn shrugged. I guess I did. That's how healing begins. Evelyn looked toward the harbor. I don't think healing is the same as forgetting. No. Margaret linked her arm gently through Evelyn's. It means remembering without bleeding. Back in Manhattan, Damien couldn't stop replaying one sentence. We have to make sure she never suspects anything. Victoria had said those exact words before the kiss. At first, he believed she had been referring to confidential negotiations. Now, he wasn't so sure. He requested security footage. Every hallway, every elevator, every executive floor. For the previous 6 months, Michael entered carrying multiple encrypted hard drives. Our IT department recovered deleted files. Deleted by whom? They're still tracing it. Hours disappeared. Damien watched recordings until his eyes burned. Meeting after meeting. Hallway conversations. Private dinners. Charity galas. Then, one clip caught his attention. The night before Evelyn left. Victoria stood inside Richard Ellison's office. There was no audio. Only video. Richard handed her a folder. Victoria smiled. Then he pointed toward Damien's office. She nodded. The timestamp read, December dreared. 1 day before the kiss. Damien leaned closer. What were you planning? Victoria sat alone inside her luxury apartment overlooking the Hudson River. She poured herself another glass of expensive Bordeaux. Her phone vibrated. Richard. She answered immediately. You've been asking questions, Richard said. He suspects something. He suspects everyone. No. Victoria stared through the window. He suspects me. Richard's voice remained cold. Then stay ahead of him. Victoria closed her eyes. For months, she had convinced herself everything had been necessary. Damien had underestimated her. The council had overlooked her. Every promotion had required proving herself twice as capable as the men around her. Power wasn't given. It was taken. She repeated that belief often. Lately, it sounded less convincing. She remembered college. Evelyn lending her rent money without hesitation. Helping her study for finals. Standing beside her as maid of honor at a cousin's wedding. Real friendship. Real loyalty. Things Victoria had traded for ambition. Her reflection in the window looked strangely unfamiliar. The breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. Late Friday evening. Michael rushed into Damien's office carrying a tablet. We recovered deleted emails. Damien stood immediately. Show me. One message. Marked confidential. Sent from Richard Ellison to Victoria Hayes. 3 days before Evelyn arrived at the penthouse. Subject. Operation Winterglass. Damien opened it. His heartbeat slowed. Every sentence felt colder than the last. Damien must appear emotionally compromised before the January confidence vote. Public scandal is preferable to financial allegations. Personal relationships create stronger headlines than accounting investigations. Ensure his wife becomes an unavoidable witness. Once distracted, we proceed with the leadership transition. There it was. In plain language. The kiss. Not romance. Not an affair. A weapon. Designed. Calculated. Engineered. His hands tightened around the tablet until his knuckles turned white. Victoria had kissed him deliberately. She had leaned in while pretending to discuss a media strategy. He had instinctively pulled away seconds later. Too late. Evelyn had already seen enough. He remembered shouting after Victoria, demanding to know what she was doing. He remembered chasing toward the elevator, finding it already descending. He had believed Evelyn simply needed time. He never imagined she had witnessed only the first few seconds. Only the part that condemned him forever. He lowered his head. My God. Michael remained silent. Damien whispered to himself. She never saw me push Victoria away. The realization crushed him. Weeks of pain, months of separation. 2 unborn children growing up without their father. All because of a moment carefully staged by people who valued control more than human lives. Damien's grief transformed into something quieter. More dangerous. Hesolvi. He looked out across Manhattan. The confidence vote. Michael nodded. Monday morning. They think they're removing me. What are you going to do? Damien picked up the ultrasound photographs and slipped them carefully back into his jacket. His voice was calm. They're not taking my company. A long pause followed. After that, his eyes drifted toward the snow-covered skyline. I'm bringing my family home. Far away in Maine, Evelyn stood on the beach as the twins kicked against her ribs once more. She smiled at the horizon, completely unaware that, for the first time since she had disappeared, the truth was finally beginning to catch up with the lie that had destroyed her marriage. The ocean remained peaceful. But back in New York, a storm was gathering. By the time February settled over New England, winter had become less of a season and more of a way of life. Snow covered the rooftops of Camden like thick white quilts. The harbor froze around the edges, trapping small fishing boats in glittering sheets of ice until the afternoon tide loosened them again. The tourists had disappeared months earlier, leaving only the locals who greeted each other by first name inside bakeries, grocery stores, and the little bookstore on Main Street. Evelyn Carter had become one of them. No one asked why she had moved from New York. No one questioned why a woman in her early 30s wore a wedding band on a chain around her neck instead of on her finger. Small towns understood that some stories were offered freely. Others were earned over time. Her pregnancy had entered its 7th month. Everything was heavier now. Walking, sleeping, breathing. Even tying her boots required patience. The twins had developed entirely different personalities before taking their first breaths. One kicked whenever she played classical music through the tiny speaker beside her bed. The other seemed to prefer silence, becoming most active after midnight when the entire town slept. Dr. Rebecca Lawson smiled during another routine appointment. They're healthy. Evelyn released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. And me? Rebecca studied the chart. You're healthy, too. A brief pause. But you're exhausted. I'm fine. No. The doctor removed her glasses. You're surviving. There was a difference. I see women raising children alone every year. Some choose it. Some don't. What concerns me isn't whether you'll be a good mother. Evelyn managed a tired smile. What concerns you? Whether you'll remember you're still a person after they arrive. The words lingered long after the appointment ended. That evening, Margaret found Evelyn sitting alone on the porch despite the freezing wind. A knitted baby blanket rested across her lap. She wasn't sewing. She was simply holding it. You'll catch pneumonia. I needed air. Margaret sat beside her. After nearly 3 months together, silence between them had become comfortable. Finally, Evelyn spoke. I'm scared. Margaret nodded. I know. What if I can't do this? You can. What if loving them isn't enough? The older woman looked toward the Atlantic Ocean. When my husband died, everyone kept telling me I was strong. She smiled sadly. I hated hearing it. Why? Because strength isn't waking up fearless. She reached for Evelyn's hand. It's waking up terrified. And feeding the chickens anyway. Evelyn laughed softly through tears. I'm not sure twins are the same as chickens. No. Margaret grinned. They're usually louder. The laughter faded. Then Evelyn whispered the truth she had never spoken aloud. I still love him. The confession escaped almost against her will. Margaret didn't look surprised. I know. I hate what he did. I know. I don't know which feeling hurts more. Margaret squeezed her hand. Sometimes grief and love wear the same face. 900 miles away, Damian Volkov stood inside the executive conference room that had become the center of an entirely different battlefield. The atmosphere was no longer professional. It was hostile. The internal investigation had expanded beyond suspicious wire transfers. Forensic accountants uncovered falsified invoices stretching back nearly 5 years. Consulting contracts signed by companies that didn't exist. Artificially inflated acquisition costs. Confidential client information leaked before negotiations. Entire divisions had been quietly manipulated to benefit shell corporations connected to members of the Executive Council. Damian stared at the growing evidence spread across the conference table. Olivia Bennett broke the silence. They weren't just stealing money. She highlighted another report. They were weakening Volkov Holdings from inside. Michael added another folder. Every failed acquisition made shareholders question your leadership. And every crisis made the council appear indispensable, Damian finished. Richard Ellison hadn't been protecting the company. He had been preparing to inherit it. One crisis at a time. Federal investigators arrived 2 days later. Not because Damian was legally required to involve them. Because he refused to let corruption be handled quietly. Agents from the Financial Crimes Task Force spent hours reviewing digital records. One investigator looked across the table. Mr. Volkov. Yes? You realize exposing this will damage your own company's reputation. Damian answered without hesitation. A reputation built on lies deserves to be damaged. The investigator nodded slowly. You don't sound like most CEOs. Damian looked out the window. I'm trying not to sound like the man I was 6 months ago. Power had once been his first instinct. Now, truth mattered more. Meanwhile, Victoria watched the walls closing in. Her office felt smaller every day. More employees avoided eye contact. Whispers stopped whenever she entered a room. She knew investigations always created paranoia. The problem was that this time, the paranoia was justified. She opened her laptop. Dozens of unread messages. Most from Richard. Delete everything. Stay calm. Say nothing. She ignored them. Instead, she opened an old photo folder she hadn't visited in years. College. Summer road trips. Graduation. Evelyn standing beside her beneath autumn trees, both of them laughing so hard, neither remembered why. Another photograph. Evelyn helping her move into her first apartment. Another. Their first Thanksgiving away from their families. Victoria closed the laptop abruptly. Regret arrived too late to be useful. One snowy afternoon in Maine, Harbor Pages hosted a children's Valentine's event. Construction paper hearts decorated every shelf. Parents drank coffee while children colored cards. 8-year-old Lucy approached Evelyn carrying 2 folded valentines. These are for your babies. Evelyn blinked. For them? Lucy nodded seriously. Because everybody should get valentines. Inside the tiny cards, written in uneven pencil, were simple messages. Dear babies, please come safely. Love, Lucy. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. Children had a way of expressing love without complication. Without pride. Without conditions. She folded the cards carefully and placed them inside her purse. One day, she promised herself, the twins would read them. That night, however, reality returned with painful force. A sharp pain gripped her lower back. Then another. She froze. Panic rose instantly. Not yet. Please. Not yet. The contractions stopped after several minutes, but they left fear behind. Dr. Lawson examined her immediately. False labor. Evelyn nearly collapsed with relief. But listen carefully. Rebecca's voice grew firm. No lifting. No unnecessary stress. And absolutely no pretending you're invincible. Evelyn smiled weakly. I'll try. You won't try. Rebecca handed her new instructions. You'll obey. Back in New York, Damien received another breakthrough. Michael entered carrying an evidence box recovered from an abandoned storage unit rented under a shell corporation. Inside were hard drives, paper files, voice recorders, and one leather notebook. Richard Ellison's handwriting covered every page. Damien turned slowly through the entries. Meeting schedules, vote counts, financial projections. Then, a page dated nearly 4 months earlier. Objective: remove Damien before Q1. Obstacle: his wife stabilizes him emotionally. Solution: destroy trust first. Below it, one sentence written in blue ink. Victoria will handle Evelyn. Damien closed the notebook. For several seconds he couldn't speak. His marriage, reduced to a strategy. His wife, listed as an obstacle. His family, nothing more than collateral damage. Michael watched him carefully. What now? Damien answered quietly. We finish this. No matter who falls? Damien thought of Evelyn sitting somewhere alone, pregnant, believing herself abandoned. He thought of 2 babies he had never held. No matter who falls. That weekend he returned to the penthouse for the first time in days. Everything remained untouched. He walked into what would have become the nursery. Months earlier, Evelyn had shown him paint samples. Soft sage green, cream-colored curtains, a wooden rocking chair she'd found at an antique market. I don't want everything to look expensive, she had laughed. I want it to feel loved. He had kissed her forehead. We'll make it perfect. Now the room stood empty. Bare walls. Unopened boxes. Silence. Damien sat on the unfinished nursery floor. He removed the ultrasound photographs once again. I know you're out there. His voice echoed softly through the vacant room. I'm too late to protect your mother. He swallowed hard. But I swear. His fingers tightened around the tiny images. I won't be too late to become your father. Far away in Maine, the twins kicked together for the first time. Evelyn laughed despite herself. The movements were so strong that she instinctively reached for the empty side of the bed. Her hand found only cold sheets. For one heartbreaking second, muscle memory betrayed her. She had expected Damien to be there, to laugh with her, to place his hand over her stomach the way he always dreamed he would. Instead, she whispered into the darkness. They're getting stronger. There was no answer. Only the steady rhythm of the ocean beyond the window. 2 people, separated by nearly 1,000 miles, fighting entirely different battles. One against loneliness, the other against betrayal. Neither realized that both wars were leading them toward the same inevitable destination. And time was beginning to run out. March arrived quietly. In Maine, winter began loosening its grip. Thin streams of melted snow trickled down rocky hillsides, and patches of green grass cautiously emerged beneath the fading white. The Atlantic remained cold, but the air carried the faint promise that spring was no longer a dream. Evelyn noticed it during her morning walks. The twins noticed nothing except that their tiny world was growing smaller by the day. Her belly had become impossible to hide. Every step demanded patience. Every night required a carefully arranged fortress of pillows just to sleep for a few hours. Yet somehow, she had never loved exhaustion more. Each ache reminded her that her babies were still with her. Still fighting. Still growing. Harbor Pages opened later than usual on Tuesday morning. Daniel insisted. You need fewer hours. I'm fine. He folded his arms. Everyone who says that is usually the opposite. Margaret laughed from behind the coffee counter. She's arguing with the entire town now. Evelyn smiled. You've all adopted me. Daniel shrugged. Small towns don't ask permission. Before she could answer, little Lucy burst through the front door carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. They're for the babies. Evelyn accepted them carefully. They're beautiful. Lucy looked at her stomach with complete seriousness. When are they coming? The doctor says very soon. Will they know you're their mommy? The innocent question caught Evelyn completely off guard. She swallowed. I hope so. Lucy frowned. They'll know. How? Because you're always talking to them. The child spoke as though it were the simplest fact in the world. Children rarely complicated love. Adults almost always did. 900 miles south, Damien Volkov had forgotten what a normal workday felt like. His office no longer resembled the headquarters of a billion-dollar corporation. Evidence boxes filled one corner. Financial reports covered another. Federal investigators moved through conference rooms carrying laptops, legal files, and search warrants. The investigation had grown beyond Volkov Holdings. 3 consulting firms. 2 investment funds. 4 shell corporations. All connected. All leading back to members of the Executive Council. Richard Ellison had vanished 48 hours earlier. The FBI was already searching for him. Victoria remained under internal review, though she had not yet been charged with a crime. She came to work every morning. She left every evening. Each day looking a little less certain than the last. Damien barely noticed. His attention belonged elsewhere. Always elsewhere. Late Wednesday afternoon, Olivia Bennett entered Damien's office, carrying an old archive box. "I found something while legal was organizing personnel files." Damien looked up. "What is it?" "I'm not sure." She placed the faded cardboard box on his desk. "It's from Human Resources." He opened it absent-mindedly. Inside were outdated employee benefit records, health insurance forms, retirement documents, emergency contacts. Most were years old. He almost closed the box. Then, one familiar name stopped him. Evelyn Carter Volkov. His heartbeat slowed. The file had been misfiled with Executive Family Benefits after an insurance policy update months earlier. He opened it carefully. Most documents were routine. Address changes, coverage renewals, dental claims. Then, a folded medical authorization dated 3 weeks before Evelyn disappeared. Across the top, in bold letters, prenatal care authorization. Damien frowned. He already knew she had been pregnant. The ultrasound had told him that. But another page slipped loose. It had never been processed because Evelyn had changed providers after leaving New York. A handwritten physician's note. He unfolded it. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Patient, Evelyn Carter Volkov. Gestational age, 30 weeks. Pregnancy type, dichorionic dimnotic twin pregnancy. Estimated delivery date, April 18. April. He looked at the calendar on his desk. March 22. His breathing stopped. Less than 4 weeks. Less than 1 month until his children entered the world. His knees weakened. He lowered himself into his chair without realizing it. For months, he had imagined there was still time. Time to find her. Time to explain. Time to repair what had been broken. Now time had become something else entirely. A deadline. Olivia watched the color drain from his face. Damien. He didn't answer. He kept staring at the date. April Obsprezicha. His daughter. His son. Or, perhaps 2 daughters. 2 sons. He didn't even know. He knew nothing. Nothing except that Evelyn had carried them alone for 7 months. Attended every doctor's appointment alone. Felt every kick. Every fear. Every sleepless night. Without him. A wave of guilt hit with such force that he had to steady himself against the desk. "I wasn't there." His voice barely existed. Olivia remained silent. There wasn't a single appointment. He swallowed painfully. Not one. His mind drifted backward. He remembered Evelyn standing in the kitchen one autumn morning. "What would you do if we had twins?" He had laughed. "I'd panic." She had laughed even harder. "No, seriously." He pulled her into his arms. "I'd buy twice as many books." "Not toys?" "They'll outgrow toys." "What about books?" "They'll outgrow some." He kissed her forehead. "But they'll always remember who read them the stories." The memory shattered him. He covered his face with both hands. For the first time since Evelyn disappeared, he allowed himself to imagine the births he was about to miss. Her reaching for someone whose hand wasn't there. Her crying alone. Their babies opening their eyes. Searching instinctively for voices they had heard for months. Only one voice would greet them. Not his. Because he had failed before they had even been born. Across the country, Evelyn sat in Dr. Lawson's examination room. The twins' heartbeats echoed steadily through the Doppler monitor. Fast. Strong. Beautiful. Rebecca smiled. "They're doing wonderfully." Evelyn smiled back. "They've been kicking all night. They're running out of room." A nurse entered carrying additional paperwork. "One more thing." Rebecca glanced toward Evelyn. "If labor starts early." She hesitated. Is there anyone you'd like us to contact? The room became painfully quiet. Evelyn looked down at her wedding ring hanging from the silver chain around her neck. Her thumb rubbed its smooth surface automatically. There isn't anyone. Rebecca spoke gently. The baby's father? Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, he doesn't know where I am. And if something happens? Evelyn closed her eyes. Then, you call Margaret. Rebecca nodded. She didn't ask another question. Some wounds announced themselves without explanation. Back in Manhattan, Damien refused to waste another minute. Michael. His assistant appeared almost instantly. I need every resource we have. We've already hired 4 investigation firms. I don't care. Damien stood. Double it. What exactly are we looking for? My wife. Michael hesitated. We've been looking for Evelyn Volkov. Damien shook his head. We've been looking in the wrong places. He walked toward the massive window overlooking the city. She doesn't want to be found as my wife. Michael understood immediately. She wants to disappear. No. Damien stared toward the distant horizon. She wants peace. He turned back. Search small towns, coastal communities, independent bookstores, local prenatal clinics. Anywhere a woman trying to escape Manhattan might choose to build a quiet life. Michael nodded. I'll start immediately. As he reached the door, Damien spoke again. And Michael. Yes? If we find her. His voice cracked for the first time in weeks. I don't want security teams. I don't want lawyers. I don't want public relations. He looked down at the ultrasound photographs still resting on his desk. Want to make it before our children are born. That evening, Victoria sat alone in the nearly empty executive office. Most employees had already gone home. She watched the cleaning staff move silently through the hallway. Her phone buzzed with another news alert. Federal investigation expands into executive corruption case. She turned it face down. For weeks, she had convinced herself that losing Damien would be worth gaining influence. Now she had neither. Richard had abandoned everyone. The council was collapsing. The company she had hoped to control no longer trusted her. And the only friend who had ever loved her unconditionally had vanished. She whispered into the empty office. What have I done? No one answered. Hundreds of miles away, the Atlantic Ocean rolled gently onto the Maine shoreline. Evelyn stood barefoot in the damp sand, despite Margaret's protests. The babies shifted together beneath her coat. She smiled instinctively. I know. She rested both hands over her belly. We're almost there. A cold breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. She looked toward the endless horizon. Somewhere beyond it, Damien was living a completely different life. She wondered, not for the first time, whether he had ever thought about the family they almost had. Then she shook the thought away. It no longer mattered. Or at least she kept telling herself that. Far away, Damien stood in the nursery that had never been finished. He carefully unfolded the medical record once more. 30 weeks. April obsprzecze. Only weeks remained. The walls he had built around his grief, the discipline, the control, the relentless. He no longer cared about winning board votes. He no longer cared about preserving his reputation. He no longer cared about Wall Street headlines. There was only one measure of success left. Finding Evelyn before she faced the greatest moment of her life alone. For the first time, the search was no longer about saving his marriage. It was about reaching his family before time ran out. And somewhere in the quiet streets of coastal Maine, time was already counting down. Spring arrived first as a smell. The scent of thawing earth drifted through the pine forests surrounding Camden, carrying traces of salt water and damp cedar. Snow retreated from the hillsides in uneven patches, revealing weathered fences, wildflowers waiting beneath frozen soil, and narrow roads that wound toward the Atlantic like forgotten memories. To Evelyn Carter, spring didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a deadline. 36 weeks. The twins had grown so large that every movement demanded her full attention. Standing required effort, sitting too long made her back ache. Sleeping had become an exercise in patience rather than rest. Every morning, she crossed another day off the small paper calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. April was only days away. Margaret found her folding impossibly tiny baby clothes at the kitchen table. 2 white onesies. 2 knitted hats. 2 pairs of socks no larger than the palm of her hand. You've folded those 3 times. Evelyn smiled faintly. They keep getting wrinkled. Margaret looked at her knowingly. No. She sat beside her. You're nervous. The younger woman let out a quiet breath. I've never been this responsible for anyone. You already are. I mean. Evelyn swallowed. When they arrive. Margaret reached across the table. You don't become a mother the day you give birth. When, then? The day you begin putting someone else's needs before your own. She nodded toward Evelyn's untouched breakfast. You've already been doing that for 8 months. Evelyn looked down at her rounded stomach. The twins shifted together beneath her sweater. She smiled automatically. I hope they know how loved they are. They do. How can you be so sure? Margaret laughed softly. Because I know their mother. Nearly 1,000 miles away, Damian Volkov stared at a map covered with colored pins. Private investigators had traced hundreds of possibilities over the past 3 months. Chicago, Boston, Seattle, Charleston. Every lead had ended in disappointment. Until now. Michael entered carrying a thin manila folder. We found something. Damian looked up so quickly, his chair nearly tipped backward. What? A bookstore owner in Camden, Maine, remembered hiring a woman from New York. His heart began pounding. No last name? She introduced herself only as Evelyn. Michael slid several photographs across the desk. Grainy surveillance images from a nearby pharmacy. A grocery store. The local harbor. Then, one picture taken from across Main Street. A woman in a blue coat. One hand resting gently against a very pregnant stomach. Damian stopped breathing. Even blurred by distance. He knew her. He would have recognized her anywhere. His fingers trembled against the photograph. When? 3 days ago. 3 days. Not months. Not weeks. 3 days. She was there. Alive. Waiting for their children. Without another word, Damian stood. Cancel everything. You have shareholders flying in tomorrow. They can fly home. The emergency board session. Michael. Damian's voice remained calm. For the first time in my career. He picked up the photograph. My family comes first. The private jet landed in Portland before sunrise. From there, Damian insisted on driving himself. The highway gradually gave way to smaller roads lined with evergreen forests and weathered farmhouses. Every mile north seemed to strip away another layer of the man he used to be. The expensive watch on his wrist suddenly felt meaningless. The custom-tailored suit felt absurd. For years, he had believed success was measured in market share. Now, success meant arriving before it was too late. Camden welcomed him with quiet dignity. Fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor. Couples walked hand in hand along the waterfront. Children rode bicycles without anyone worrying about traffic. Nobody recognized Damian Volkov. For the first time in years. He was grateful. He parked near Main Street and stared at the modest storefront. Harbor Pages. The painted sign swayed gently in the ocean breeze. Inside, shelves overflowed with novels, children's books, and handwritten recommendations from staff. A bell chimed as he entered. Daniel Pierce looked up from arranging a display. Good morning. Damian hesitated. I'm looking for someone. Daniel smiled politely. We usually help people find books. Her name is Evelyn. The smile disappeared. Silence settled over the shop. Daniel's expression became cautious. I don't know anyone by that name. Damian expected the answer. I understand. He removed his wallet. Not for money. For a photograph. It showed him and Evelyn during their anniversary trip to Nantucket. She was laughing. Looking at him. Daniel recognized her instantly. His shoulders relaxed only slightly. You're her husband. Damian nodded. I am. Daniel studied him carefully. She never said you were coming. She doesn't know. Another long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. Wait here. Evelyn was organizing children's books in the back room when Daniel knocked softly. Someone's here. She smiled. If it's Mrs. Henderson, tell her the mystery novels came in. It's not Mrs. Henderson. His voice sounded different. Concerned. Evelyn. She looked up. What is it? Daniel hesitated. Then stepped aside. Damian stood in the doorway. For several seconds, neither moved. Neither breathed. The room became impossibly still. 8 months of grief. Thousands of unanswered questions. Hundreds of sleepless nights. All collapsed into one silent moment. Damien saw her first. Her face looked thinner. More tired. Yet, somehow even more beautiful than he remembered. Then his eyes lowered. To her stomach. His children. His chest tightened so sharply he almost reached for support. There. His voice failed. Evelyn instinctively stepped backward. They're healthy. The words were polite. Careful. Like speaking to a stranger. I've dreamed about this moment every day. I haven't. The answer landed softly. Which somehow hurt more. Daniel quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. Damien remained several feet away. He refused to move closer without permission. I've been looking everywhere. I know. You knew? She nodded. I saw the investigators. The phone calls. The letters. She struggled to maintain her composure. Couldn't come back. Damien's eyes filled with regret. Evelyn. The kiss wasn't what you think. She closed her eyes. I know. The words stunned him. He blinked. You know? I read the news. She looked toward the window overlooking the harbor. The investigation. The arrests. The leaked emails. I know it was a setup. Hope flickered inside him. Then disappeared with her next sentence. But that doesn't change what happened. He frowned. It changes everything. No. She finally looked directly into his eyes. It changes why it happened. A painful silence followed. She continued quietly. When I needed you most. You weren't there. I was trying to push her away. I know. You left before. I know. Then why? Her answer came with heartbreaking honesty. Because trust isn't destroyed only by betrayal. She rested one hand protectively over her belly. It can also be destroyed by realizing how vulnerable your life became without you noticing. Damien listened without interrupting. For months. She whispered. I asked myself one question. What question? If your company, if your board, if your career could create a situation where another woman could stand close enough to kiss you, where your wife could walk in without anyone protecting her, where politics mattered more than your marriage, then maybe I had already been alone long before I left. The words struck harder than any accusation. Because they were true. I failed you. The admission came quietly. Without excuses. Without explanations. I kept believing I could separate work from home. He looked around the little bookstore. I was wrong. I let people into our lives who never deserved our trust. I made you carry everything alone. His eyes drifted toward her stomach. And I missed almost all of this. Evelyn felt tears forming despite every promise she had made to herself. I wanted you there. Her voice broke. So many times. The first heartbeat. The first ultrasound. The first kick. She laughed sadly through tears. One of them always starts kicking when I read stories. Damien smiled through his own tears. That sounds like you. I reached for your hand one night. She looked away. It wasn't there. He closed his eyes. Every sentence carved another wound inside him. Not because she was trying to hurt him. Because she wasn't. She was simply telling the truth. They walked together to the harbor without speaking. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before them. Waves rolled gently against the rocks below. Finally, Damien spoke. Come home. Evelyn watched the water. I am home. He looked around. This little town? She nodded. These people showed up when I had nothing. They never asked who I married. They never cared how much money we had. They just loved me. Damien lowered his head. I want to be part of that. You can't. She turned toward him. Not today. The wind carried her hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. I forgive you for the kiss. He looked up hopefully. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. The hope faded. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know if we'll ever be the people we were. She gently took his hand for the first time in 8 months. Only for a moment. You don't have to convince me that you love me. She released it. You have to show me that loving us will always matter more than everything else. Damien nodded slowly. No argument. No pleading. No promises he couldn't prove. For perhaps the first time in his entire life, Damien Volkov understood something that no business school, no boardroom, and no billion-dollar deal had ever taught him. Love could not be negotiated. It could not be demanded. It could not be purchased. It could only be earned. As the sun began to set over the Atlantic, they stood side by side, not reconciled, not separated, but suspended somewhere in between. The distance between them was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in trust. And Damien knew that crossing it would take far more than a single apology. It would take becoming the man Evelyn had believed he was all along. The morning after Damien arrived in Camden, he woke before sunrise in a small bed and breakfast overlooking Penobscot Bay. The room was barely larger than his walk-in closet back in Manhattan. The mattress creaked. The coffee came in a ceramic mug instead of a gold-trimmed espresso cup. Outside, fishing boats left the harbor beneath a sky painted with pale shades of lavender and orange. For the first time in years, he felt exactly where he needed to be. Not because life had become easier, because it had finally become honest. Across town, Evelyn watched from the bookstore window as Damien walked alone along the waterfront. He carried no security detail, no chauffeur, no assistant following him with an iPad. He stopped to help an elderly fisherman lift heavy crates from the dock. Later, he bought coffee for a construction crew after accidentally stepping into fresh cement and laughing at himself. The town had no idea who he was. To them, he was simply another visitor. Margaret noticed Evelyn watching. "You've been standing there 10 minutes. "I know. What are you looking for?" Evelyn answered quietly. "To see whether he's acting. Or changing." Margaret smiled gently. "Those are two very different things. I've confused them before. So have most people." Back in New York, the storm Damien had uncovered finally broke across Wall Street. Federal prosecutors announced criminal indictments against 3 members of Volkov Holdings' executive council. Financial news networks interrupted regular programming. Corporate governance experts filled television studios. Every headline carried a variation of the same story. Corporate conspiracy exposed. Executive corruption investigation expands. Volkov Holdings faces historic restructuring. Richard Ellison was arrested at a private airport in Switzerland while attempting to board a flight to the United Arab Emirates. Another council member accepted a plea agreement. Search warrants uncovered millions of dollars hidden through offshore shell companies. The conspiracy that had quietly poisoned the company for years was collapsing under the weight of its own greed. Victoria Hayes remained the final piece. She voluntarily walked into the office of Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Alvarez, carrying a single cardboard box. Inside were laptops, personal journals, encrypted flash drives, signed contracts, everything. Karen looked at her carefully. "You're cooperating?" Victoria nodded. "I'm done protecting people who would abandon anyone." "Why now?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked through the courthouse window. There was a woman. Karen waited. "Who loved me like a sister." Victoria's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I traded her for ambition." She closed her eyes. And it still wasn't enough. For the first time since the conspiracy began, Victoria told the complete truth. Not to save herself. Because she no longer wanted to live inside the lie. 3 days later, Damien returned briefly to Manhattan. Not to reclaim power. To surrender part of it. The emergency shareholders meeting filled the auditorium at Volkov Tower. Investors expected celebration. After all, Damien had defeated the conspiracy. His position as CEO had never been stronger. Instead, he walked onto the stage carrying only a thin folder. No prepared speech. No public relations team. No dramatic presentation. Thousands watched online as financial journalists streamed the meeting live. Damien adjusted the microphone. "For years," he began, "I believed leadership meant protecting this company." A quiet silence spread through the room. "I was wrong." People exchanged confused glances. "My first responsibility should always have been protecting the people who trusted me." He paused. "I failed." Those 2 words echoed through the auditorium. No executive in recent memory had ever spoken them publicly. "I failed my employees by allowing corruption to survive inside this organization. I failed our shareholders by believing success excused oversight. And," his voice softened, I failed my family by believing I could always make time for them tomorrow. No cameras cut away. No one interrupted. Damien continued. My wife paid the highest price for my blindness. He never mentioned Evelyn by name. He didn't need to. This company will not move forward by pretending leadership is infallible. He opened the folder. Effective immediately. I am dissolving the current executive council. Murmurs spread instantly. He continued. A new governance structure will replace it. No executive, including myself, will possess unilateral authority over internal investigations. Independent ethics officers will report directly to the board. Anonymous employee protections will become permanent. And he looked across the room. My own compensation will be reduced by 60% over the next 5 years. Reporters stared in disbelief. Every dollar would fund employee family assistance, parental leave expansion, and mental health programs. The company that had once revolved around quarterly profits would now invest in the people behind those profits. Wall Street analysts immediately questioned the decision. Some called it reckless. Others called it visionary. Damien didn't care. For once. Stock prices weren't the measure that mattered. Camden received the news that evening. Harbor Pages kept a small television near the cafe. Daniel quietly increased the volume. Everyone watched together. Margaret looked toward Evelyn. He didn't have to do that. No. He could have blamed everyone else. Evelyn nodded. He could have. Instead, he had accepted responsibility for failures that many lawyers would have advised him to deny. She watched the interview afterward. A reporter asked, Mr. Volkov, are these reforms designed to repair your public image? Damien answered without hesitation. If repairing my image were the goal, I would have hired better lawyers. A few people laughed. He didn't. I'm not interested in appearing changed. I intend to become different. The interview ended. No emotional music. No dramatic announcement. Just quiet accountability. Evelyn turned off the television. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply sat in silence. Because for the first time since leaving New York, his actions and his words were beginning to resemble each other. That night, Damien returned to Maine. He didn't go to the bookstore. He didn't call. Instead, he left a small package on Margaret's porch. Inside were 2 children's books. Goodnight Moon. The Velveteen Rabbit. Between them rested a handwritten note. For the twins. No expectations. No pressure. Every child deserves stories. Dad. Nothing else. No request to meet. No apology repeated. No plea for forgiveness. Just, Dad. Margaret handed the package to Evelyn the next morning. She opened it slowly. When she reached the note, tears finally escaped. Not because of what it said. Because of what it didn't. For the first time, Damien wasn't asking her to make him feel better. He was thinking only about their children. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors finalized their cases. Richard Ellison accepted a lengthy prison sentence rather than face trial. Several executives received criminal convictions. Victoria entered into a cooperation agreement. Her testimony dismantled the final layers of the conspiracy. Before leaving the courthouse one afternoon, she wrote a single letter. Not to the prosecutors. Not to Damien. To Evelyn. It arrived in Maine one rainy afternoon. Evelyn read it alone. Dear Evelyn, there is no version of this letter where I deserve your forgiveness. I betrayed the safest friendship I have ever known. I convinced myself that power would finally make me feel important. Instead, it only showed me how small I had become. Damien never loved me. He never chose me. The kiss was planned, manipulated, and weaponized. But I chose to participate. That choice belongs to me alone. I cannot undo what I destroyed. I only hope one day your children grow up believing loyalty still exists in this world. Because once, you showed me exactly what it looked like. Victoria. Evelyn folded the letter carefully. She neither burned it, nor answered it. Some apologies deserved to be heard. Not all deserved a response. Days later, Damien sat alone on the rocky shoreline outside Camden. The ocean rolled endlessly before him. He skipped a flat stone across the water. It bounced 4 times before disappearing beneath the waves. You still throw like an amateur. He turned. Evelyn stood several feet away. A light spring jacket stretched gently across her pregnancy. The twins had dropped lower. Only weeks remained. He smiled. I was hoping for at least 5. You never could. She sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, she asked, are you really giving up that much control? Yes. Why? He watched another wave break against the rocks. Because I finally understand something. What? The company survived because I built it. He looked toward her. Our marriage nearly died because I stopped building it. Silence. Then he added softly, I know that changing the company doesn't erase what happened. No. It doesn't. But it proves something. She studied him carefully. What? That I'm finally willing to lose power. Instead of losing the people I love. The wind carried neither answer nor objection. Evelyn simply reached down and took one of the children's books from the paper bag resting beside him. She smiled faintly at the worn cover. You remembered my favorite. I remembered everything. She looked toward the ocean. You forgot for a while. The words were gentle. Not cruel. Damien nodded. I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I don't again. She didn't promise him another chance. She didn't move closer. But neither did she walk away. As the evening sun melted into the Atlantic, the distance between them felt slightly smaller than it had the day before. Not because love had returned. Love had never truly left. Trust was quietly beginning to find its way home. The first contraction came just before dawn. Outside, the Atlantic Ocean was wrapped in a blanket of silver fog, its waves barely visible beneath the pale light of an April morning. Camden was still asleep. The bakery lights hadn't turned on. Fishing boats remained tied to their docks. Even the gulls had not yet begun their daily chorus. Inside the little white cottage overlooking the shoreline, Evelyn Carter woke with a sharp intake of breath. One hand instinctively covered her stomach. Another contraction. Longer this time. Stronger. She closed her eyes. It's time. The words were barely louder than a whisper. Margaret, already awake in the kitchen preparing coffee, heard the change in Evelyn's voice immediately. She hurried upstairs. Evelyn? Another contraction answered before Evelyn could. Margaret smiled with gentle certainty. Well. She reached for her phone. I believe 2 little people have decided they don't want to wait any longer. Camden Community Hospital was small. Only a handful of delivery rooms. No marble floors. No celebrity maternity suites. No photographers waiting outside. Just nurses who knew nearly every patient by name. Dr. Rebecca Lawson met them at the entrance. I've been expecting this call. She examined Evelyn carefully before smiling. Both babies are doing beautifully. Evelyn managed a nervous laugh. I don't feel beautiful. Rebecca grinned. Fortunately, that's not part of today's job. Across town, Damien sat inside Harbor Pages. He hadn't gone far during the previous week. He rented a modest cottage nearby, refusing to pressure Evelyn while staying close enough in case she ever needed him. Every morning, he helped Daniel unload deliveries before the bookstore opened. Every afternoon, he repaired broken shelves, swept floors, and quietly disappeared before closing time. Nobody had asked him to. He simply kept showing up. His phone rang. Margaret. He answered immediately. Is she all right? It's time. For one brief second, Damien couldn't breathe. The babies? On their way. I'll be there. He was already running before the call ended. The hospital hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh coffee. Damien stopped outside the maternity ward. His hand rested on the door handle. He didn't enter. Instead, he waited. Rebecca stepped outside nearly 20 minutes later. She looked tired but calm. She asked whether you were here. His heartbeat stumbled. What did you tell her? The truth. And, Rebecca smiled gently. I told her you've been sitting in that same chair for almost an hour. He looked down, almost embarrassed. I didn't want to assume that I belonged inside. Rebecca studied him for a long moment. You're finally asking the right questions. She opened the door. Go see your wife. Evelyn looked exhausted. Strands of hair clung to her forehead. Her face was pale. Another contraction tightened across her body. She gripped the bedrail until her knuckles whitened. Damien remained near the doorway. I'll leave if you want. She looked at him. Not as the billionaire who once commanded boardrooms. Not as the man who had broken her heart. Simply, as the father of her children. Quietly, she held out her hand. He crossed the room without another word. When his fingers wrapped around hers, neither spoke. Some moments were too sacred for language. Labor lasted nearly 11 hours. The first baby arrived shortly after 3 in the afternoon. A daughter, healthy, crying loudly enough to fill the entire delivery room. Damien laughed through tears. She definitely has your lungs. Evelyn smiled weakly. I was hoping she'd get your patience. Before either of them could say more. Another cry. Only minutes later, a son. Just as healthy. Slightly smaller. Immediately searching for his sister's voice. The nurse carefully placed both newborns against Evelyn's chest. The room became impossibly quiet. Damien stared. 2 tiny faces. 10 tiny fingers. 10 tiny toes. Everything else disappeared. Wall Street. Board meetings. Private jets. Scandals. None of it existed anymore. Only this. His family. He reached out cautiously, almost afraid to touch them. They're real. His voice trembled. Evelyn looked at him. They've always been. A tear slipped down his cheek. I'm so sorry I missed everything. She watched him carefully. I know. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Simply recognition. That evening, after the nurses had taken the twins for routine examinations, Damien remained beside Evelyn's bed. The room glowed softly beneath the setting sun. He spoke without looking at her. I wrote something. He removed a folded piece of paper from his jacket. A letter? A promise. He handed it to her. Evelyn unfolded the page slowly. It wasn't long. To my daughter and my son. I cannot change the days I wasn't there. I cannot give your mother back the nights she spent alone. I cannot erase fear from your beginning. But I can decide what comes next. I promise you this. You will never compete with my career for my attention. You will never wonder whether success matters more than family. You will never question whether your father chose you. Every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you first. Love. Dad. Evelyn folded the letter carefully. She didn't cry. Not because it lacked meaning. Because some promises deserve time before becoming tears. Summer arrived gently. Camden transformed. Tourists returned. Harbor cafes filled with music. The twins Emma and Noah grew stronger every week. Emma inherited Damien's gray eyes. Noah smiled exactly like Evelyn. Damien remained in Maine. He commuted to New York only when absolutely necessary. Board meetings became video conferences. Executives learned that if a meeting conflicted with pediatric appointments, the meeting moved, not the appointment. Financial magazines called it unusual leadership. Employees quietly called it humanity. Months passed. Change revealed itself through repetition rather than grand gestures. Every midnight feeding Damien volunteered without being asked. Every diaper. Every bottle. Every pediatric visit. Every lullaby. He learned how Emma preferred falling asleep against his shoulder. He discovered Noah refused to nap unless someone softly hummed while rocking him. He burned pancakes almost every Sunday morning. He became remarkably good at assembling cribs and astonishingly bad at folding baby blankets. The little things. The ordinary things. The things that never appeared in newspapers. They mattered most. One October afternoon, Evelyn stood outside the bookstore watching Emma sleep inside her stroller while Noah rested against Damien's chest in a baby carrier. Daniel joined her. He loves those kids. Evelyn smiled. More every day. Daniel looked toward Damien. And you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched Damien kneel beside Lucy, now proudly showing Emma how to stack colorful wooden blocks. No cameras. No audience. No performance. Just a father. Eventually, Evelyn spoke. I kept waiting for him to become the man he used to be. And? He never did. Daniel smiled. Good. She laughed softly. He became someone better. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Damien found Evelyn sitting on the porch overlooking the ocean. The same porch where months earlier she had confessed her fear of raising twins alone. He sat beside her. Neither hurried to speak. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Finally, Evelyn reached into her sweater pocket. She removed a small velvet box. His wedding ring. the one she had left behind in Manhattan. She placed it gently into his hand. I kept it. He looked at the ring. Then at her. I wasn't sure you ever would. I wasn't either. Another quiet moment passed. I can't pretend none of this happened. I don't want you to. The memories are still there. I know. They always will be. Damien nodded. I'll carry them with you. She smiled. The kind of smile he hadn't seen in almost a year. I don't need you to carry them for me. She slowly intertwined her fingers with his. I just don't want to carry them alone anymore. He closed his eyes. Not from relief. From gratitude. Because trust had returned exactly the way it had to. Not through speeches. Not through dramatic declarations. Through hundreds of ordinary choices made faithfully every single day. Winter approached once more. Exactly 1 year after Evelyn had walked out of the Manhattan penthouse carrying ultrasound photographs, the four of them stood together on the same Maine shoreline. Emma giggled as the wind caught her tiny knit hat. Noah reached eagerly toward the crashing waves from Damien's arms. Evelyn laughed, leaning against Damien's shoulder without hesitation. The ocean looked exactly as it had the day she first arrived. Only she had changed. So had he. Damien looked toward the horizon. Do you ever miss New York? She considered the question. I miss parts of it. The penthouse? She smiled. No. The city? Sometimes. He looked around the quiet coastline. Then why stay here? Evelyn watched Emma chase tiny seashells with determined little steps, while Noah clapped excitedly from his father's arms. Then she answered with complete certainty. Because home was never the apartment. She slipped her hand into Damien's. It was always the people willing to fight their way back to each other. The wind carried their laughter across the water. Behind them, the little cottage glowed warmly beneath the evening sky. Ahead of them stretched an uncertain future filled with scraped knees, bedtime stories, school concerts, disagreements, forgiveness, anniversaries, and ordinary Tuesdays. Exactly the kind of future they had nearly lost. Love had survived. Not because betrayal had never happened. Not because the pain had disappeared. But because two wounded people had discovered that forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a decision renewed in countless ordinary days. And in the end, Damien Volkov learned that the greatest victory of his life was never reclaiming his company. It was earning the privilege of hearing two small voices call him Dad.